Well, Ontario Senator Vernon White, he knows this place well. He served as an assistant commissioner of the RCMP, and he was an Ottawa police chief, and he joins me now from Ottawa. Senator White, it's good to meet you. Thanks for joining us.
You too. No, thank you very much for having me on.
Let's start with the police action we're seeing now. As a former chief, what do you make of the action we've seen today?
It's kind of what I expected. I thought we would see the soft outside and a little bit harder inside. And that's what we're seeing. So I expected that when they get into the Wellington Street area, that's where the hardcore group would be. I'm also pleased to see some people leaving and recognizing that this is no gain for them at this point in time. So hopefully they will move on and we won't see them back. That's always a concern. So no, this is what I expected. I'm glad we are where we are actually. And my understanding is very few, so a couple of minor injuries, but hopefully now that as we get through this hardcore group, it'll maintain that.
We're 9 to 10 hours into this, roughly. I've kind of lost track of time during the occupation. I'm not going to lie to you. But based on the progress that we're seeing now and where they are, I mean, how long do you think this could take?
Well, I hate to quote other people, but there's no rush. This is about doing it right. If you rush in too much, you could end up with a situation that you can't control. I'm so impressed with the level of control they've maintained throughout today. I think they're doing it exactly as it should be done by taking space, owning space, taking space. That's exactly what they're doing. And I'm really pleased to see the horses, I believe, out of Toronto as well. They're very helpful in moving crowds so that you can gain some land from protesters. Is
there a risk with deploying horses? I mean, those are large, heavy animals, right? I mean, I know they're effective. But when I saw those images earlier, I was terrified someone was going to get trampled or knocked down.
Yeah, look, there's a risk in everything we do and everything the police do, obviously, but I've seen them deployed in Washington previously and in other parts of the U.S. in particular, as well as in Toronto. And they're very effective for the exact reason you just said, is because people are afraid as soon as they see these 2,200-pound animal moving toward them, it puts them on their heels, and that's exactly what you want to do. But they're very effective at gaining space.
You know, we're seeing this action today, and as you said, it appears to be professional and policeful in a law enforcement sense. I think for most people who have never been part of something like this, there's an inherent level of conflict to this. But are you surprised it took 3 weeks for police to get to this point?
Yeah, you know what? I guess in the first couple of days, I thought we would see this be dealt with quickly. But I think we have to go back to the words of the former police chief when he said that he felt it would need more resources than he had. Obviously, when we're looking at the number of resources required to displace this group, it does need a lot of resources. You know, we have police officers from across the province and even outside of the province. And I think that's one thing people miss with the Emergencies Act that it allowed to be called upon resources outside of what you normally would have access to for such a protest or demonstration. So I would like to have seen this end within a couple of days. It didn't. So I'm just pleased today that I think we can see the end. I still think we're a day or two away from actually getting there, but I do think we'll get there.
I want to get to the Emergencies Act point you made in just a second, but you mentioned the lack of resourcing for Ottawa police to sort of deal with this once it became entrenched. But what about the decision to allow it to become entrenched? I mean, it doesn't take 1,800 police officers to say you cannot park trucks on Wellington Street and block it off. I mean, they do it every Canada Day. You can't drive down there on Canada Day and leave your vehicles. So, I mean, wasn't that the mistake that led to a lot of this?
Without a question, someone asked were mistakes made. Unless your plan was to let this happen, obviously mistakes were made. But we all make mistakes. Policing is not a pure science. It's not a perfect science. But they should not have been allowed on Wellington Street. It's a red zone and certainly shouldn't have been allowed to be parked there. And absolutely, it should have been barricaded off. I've argued for 7 years that Wellington Street should be part of the parliamentary precinct, which means it could be controlled as such by parliamentary precinct. And in fact, I've argued it should be pedestrian only. And this wouldn't have happened. So maybe this accentuates the challenge I think that it presents. But still, I think it should have been barricaded so that no vehicles would have been allowed on Wellington Street. We probably still would have ended up with a blockade. It wouldn't have been where it is. It wouldn't have had the backdrop to Parliament Hill for those who became emboldened and gained strength from it, and in fact gained numbers from it as well. So yeah, I cannot imagine this happening ever again. And hopefully we'll see a movement to turn Wellington Street into part of the parliamentary precinct.
Okay, I want to pick up on that in a second too, but I do want to go back to the Emergencies Act because you mentioned that it allows for policing resources to come in and respond more quickly than they would under the normal rules of engagement. The House had to suspend debate on the use of the Emergencies Act today because of all the police action and the staff couldn't get in. It wasn't safe to do it. The Senate is going to start debating this if it passes the House when it eventually gets to a vote. I mean, what's your position on this? Was it necessary for the Prime Minister and his cabinet to use these extraordinary powers?
Well, it's a piece of legislation that brought forward in 1988. It's not archaic. This isn't, people say it's the War Measures Act will have soldiers in the streets. This is not soldiers in the streets. It guarantees proportionality. The reality is we're debating it in the House of Commons and the Senate, and people can go to court and have it reviewed based on the level of proportionate use of force. So I think this is exactly the way legislation should be used. For emergencies. And at the end of the day, people will be judged by its use. I support it. I felt that we were at a point of no return. I felt the challenge is not only what was happening downtown Ottawa, because it also, I think, that what we were seeing at our borders, look, we had people who had plans to kill RCMP officers. They had the firepower to do that in Alberta. Who knows what else could have happened? I think it was timely. And I think 3 weeks was more than enough time to let legislation that was in place get there without Emergencies Act. And I absolutely support it. I think it was the right time to do this. And the review will come as a result.
So you don't buy the political arguments that this is gross overreach by the Prime Minister and that the measures are too extreme and an assault on people's freedoms?
Well, I think you answered your own question, political. I think that's political dialogue. I don't think it's practical dialogue. I don't think any government would have sat here after 3 weeks and said, we shouldn't consider using it. And I think most governments would have used it.
Okay, I want to go back, if I can, on a final area to discuss. And you talked about reforming sort of the way the parliamentary precinct is policed and maybe making Wellington part of that jurisdiction and also making it pedestrian only. What about just the way policing is done in this city, right? Because this has been one of the struggles in that it's a municipality in Ontario, but it is the national capital and the seat of the federal government, and sort of municipal policing and provincial powers and federal authority all sort of collided here into a bit of inaction. I mean, do we need to take a hard look at how all of this is structured?
Well, I think we should. I think we should learn from every one of these situations. And so there are other models out there. We can look at Australia with the Australian Capital Territory, which has a New South Wales police responsible for policing in the city, as well as a parliamentary precinct, even though they have a parliamentary security as well, but they're responsible for it. So that's always something that could be considered, whether the RCMP should be the police service for the national capital region. But I think more importantly, if we have to look at this and say, clearly, where this occurred there is no jurisdictional issues. This was the jurisdiction of the Ottawa City Police. So it's not that people, I'm not sure if it's mine, I'm not sure I should pick it up. This was the OPS responsibility. But I would welcome a review to decide whether or not the National Capital Region could have a different model of policing than we have today. But I don't think that's why we are where we are today.
Okay. Senator White, I really appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Anytime. Thanks.
Right,
take care,
sir.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.